This is David Badin. I am the director of the Center for Near East Policy Research and the Israel Resource News Agency. For the past 32 years, we have worked on the subject of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, and the fact that they keep Palestinian Arab refugees in their fifth generation in refugee conditions instead of working to solve the issue. Today, at the United Nations Correspondents Association, at a time when UNRWA seeks a renewal of its mandate, we've challenged the concept that UNRWA should just get their mandate renewed with no conditions and no requirements. That's why we're here today, and that's why we're presenting our experts to question education, to question the quality of life, and to question the anti-Semitism which emanates from UNRWA. Thank you.
And welcome. Anka today is pleased to host a press briefing with the UNRWA mandate renewal under the condition of tight transparency. I want to thank our panelists, Bassem Eid, a Palestinian human rights pioneer whose family lives in an UNRWA refugee camp in Jerusalem, Rabbi Abraham Cooper, Associate Dean and Director of the Global Social Action Agenda at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Dr. Arnon Gross, an expert in Arabic language textbook, and David Bedheim, Director of the Center for Near East Policy Research. So without further ado, I will leave the floor to our panelists, and thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Rabbi Abraham Cooper. I'm the Associate Dean of the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and I direct our Global Social Action Agenda. The Wiesenthal Center is an NGO here at the United Nations and has top-tier NGO status at UNESCO and other international organizations. I'm also honored to introduce the other panelists. To my immediate right, who'll be speaking right after me, is Dr. Arnon Gross, a recognized expert on Palestinian education, textbooks from the Palestinian Authority, as well as the curriculum of the UNRWA schools. Following that, Bassem Eid, who is a Palestinian activist and an outspoken human rights activist as well. He will speak directly on his behalf and others who are in his community. And then finally, we'll be hearing from David Badin, who is the founder and director of the Center for Near East Policy Research, who's basically dedicated his entire adult life to promoting tolerance and coexistence between Israel, the Jewish people, and the Palestinian people. I will keep my remarks focused. I have a few points to make. First, this is the first stop on the Wiesenthal Center's mission next week. I'll be in Berlin on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for a series of meetings, in part, obviously, in terms of ongoing concerns of anti-Semitism in that country, but primarily to discuss the UNRWA scandal and the current situation and steps that might be taken to change the reality. Later this fall, I'll be returning to Tokyo, and part of my discussions there will be to continue the center's dialogue with the Prime Minister's office and the Foreign Ministry on Japan's key role in funding UNRWA. And I think as well, in the next few months, we will be going to the European Union headquarters as well. The points I'd like to make is that, number one, the Simon Wiesenthal Center urges donor nations to demand an immediate 3% solution. At our meeting yesterday with a member of one of the assistants to the Secretary General, our meeting yesterday also at the U.S. mission to the United Nations, the research of the wonderful people who are next to me, all quote the fact that, and what I heard from UNRWA representatives at a meeting a few weeks ago in New York with them, that their own analysis identifies, quote, only 3% of their curriculum is problematic. And so we suggest, for starters, the immediate removal of the 3% of the problematic material. We can discuss and argue whether that percentage is accurate, but considering the current state of affairs with UNRWA, its financial scandals and the rest, it would be a good thing, A, for them to go ahead and take the necessary steps to excise those materials they admit are problematic as an important step, and especially for key donor nations like Germany, like France, the UK, and Japan, who have increased the amount of support, financial support for UNRWA. This is a good starting point for some indication that it's not just going to be business as usual. Secondly, in the long range, the Simon Wiesenthal Center agrees with critics that the scandal-ridden UNRWA has to go. To be clear, again, to emphasize it, that doesn't mean it closes its doors tomorrow. And to be clear that Palestinians who need medical care should continue to receive that care. We certainly agree that Palestinian children, including and especially those in Gaza, need to be in school and to get an education. We also all know that the funding sources are all in place to take care of those needs, but that the UNRWA structure is no longer the answer to this issue. Neither is maintaining refugee status into the 5th generation and beyond. You'll hear more from Bassam Eid about that. And so we urge donor nations, especially those who have doubled down on their financial support since the U.S. stopped its payments, and the nations that have suspended their contribution pending the independent investigation of the financial scandals, to leverage their support and their positions in order to begin to create a mechanism whereas needy Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in Jordan will be assured of continued services that they need, but that at the end of the day, UNRWA has outlived its purpose. And let me just historically bring up 2 points. There was a previous UNRWA. It was spelled a little bit different. It had 2 R's instead of a W. I had a cousin, the late Sidney Flato, who actually ran an UNRWA camp outside of Frankfurt, Germany, after World War II. The people in that camp were Holocaust survivors. I believe that the UNRWA went out of business after 3 years. The International Refugee Organization, the IRO, back then in that particular era, when somewhere in the vicinity of 15 million Europeans were displaced people or refugees, they managed to move and help relocate 12 million Europeans. And they went out of business, I believe, in 1953. So the idea of maintaining from generation to generation refugee status is not something that should be in the purview of the United Nations. It has its hands full with new refugees in new crisis areas all over the world. And so the main focus of donor nations and those who are now considering not renewing their financial support, from our point of view, is the financial support for needy Palestinians and for their educational system should continue. It should no longer be handled by UNRWA. And now I'd like to ask Dr. Arnon Gross, he spells his last name Groiss, who's devoted over a decade of his life to review the UNRWA and Palestinian Authority textbooks, teachers' guides, and curriculum, To give you a little bit of a overview of what he has learned, you see in front here, these are, I believe, teacher's guides that the Palestinian Authority has produced and distributed recently. He's now included a full review of those guides, along with the review of the various textbooks, and he will briefly give you an overview of what he feels the current situation is, and when all four of us are finished, we'll be happy to take questions. It's an honor, really, to be in his presence, a man who's devoted his academic and intellectual efforts to helping the rest of the world understand what Palestinian children are being taught. Dr. Gross.
Thank you very much. I've been researching school books not only with the Palestinian Authority but also of other states, countries in the Middle East, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Syria, Egypt, Tunisia, Israel. So I have quite a view about what's in there and can compare each country with the other one. And I've done about 19 years study of school books of Palestinian Authority, and lately I've completed a research of Palestinian teachers' guides, which are heavier, thicker, and full of information which you cannot find in the school books. And I'll divide my talk into briefly, just a minute please, I forgot to, oh, that's right. The school books include the material a society would wish to instill in its younger generation's minds. The teacher's guides tell us or gives us more information and also teach us how the indoctrination process is conducted, how it goes on, how it is done. And I found out in the teacher's guides the items, sentences, questions which do not appear in the school books. And in general terms, I would say that indoctrination is divided into two. For grades 1 to, let's say, 4, and from grade 5 onward. So the indoctrination for grades 1 to 4 is simple, actually. For example, I'll read you a sentence or two, how the conflict is explained to grade 2 students. Now, the teacher is directed, actually, to say that his own father was a refugee. And I quote, "The teacher will tell a short story about our homeland, Palestine. My grandfather," the teacher's grandfather, "my grandfather used to live in a nice village in the vicinity of Haifa. He worked in agriculture, loved the land, and guarded it. On one set day, foreign faces came in order to drive my grandfather out of his land, burn the crop, and force him to emigrate to distant lands." This is for grade 2. Another piece talks about the prisons. Prisoners of war, they are called, those terrorists who act against or perpetrate terrorist activities and are jailed, sentenced and jailed. And the students are earlier taught about the misery and the necessity to liberate them. And it is given a dramatic tone by a student stands in a certain place in class, such a prison. He shouldn't move. He shouldn't get out of that circle. And this is prison for the children to understand what prison is. Another example for this age, actually, is a poem which is read to third grade students. And it says, "I will sacrifice my blood in order to water the noble's land and remove the usurper." Usurper is a code name for Israel, "from my country, and exterminate the foreigners' defeated remnants." Fulul al-Ghuraba. This is the school book, and this is the poem. And students of grade 3 understand what they should do, how to treat the enemy after the fall of Israel. This is the latest example of, needed for grades 1 to 5 and to 4, and I will now read some sentences given and show the methods of inculcation or the indoctrination in higher grades. For example, I'll read it to you. Some of the goals in a lesson titled My Grandfather's Memories. The students should find a free time to reflect on the dangers of the Jews' greedy ambitions regarding Palestine. This is for grade 9. Another example, the perpetration of extermination campaigns by the Zionist gangs. So derogatory language and hate language is often used in talking about the other side, the adversary. Now, another stuff, each inch of Palestine is ours. This is for grade 6. Write in detail about the false Zionist narrative, on what the false Zionist narrative is based. And it repeated, and this is also a method, repetition of verse time. This is on page 78. On page 147, write in detail the foundation of the false Zionist narrative, and the answer mentioned the reason for the Zionist war against the Palestinian memory. And again, facts. The Zionist narrative is false. There is a Zionist war against the Palestinian memory. This is on page 148. Another, Jerusalem is Muslim. The Muslims are Jerusalem's masters, and no voice shall be higher than their voice there. This is for grade 10. The fate of foreigners is defeat, disappearance, and loss. Foreigners are actually the Jews. Grade 6. There is an assignment for grade 7 students to draw, to make a picture of a certain episode about what is called the massacre of Dawaima in 1948. The children are taught or directed to draw a massacre picture in school. Another thing, demonization, no, just leave it out. The Zionist occupation spreads its venom in all corners of life in Palestine. This for grade 8. Another method is encouraging the children to express their feelings regarding demonized episodes or cases in the conflict. The student should prove the Palestinian child's hatred of the occupation forces. The student will be asked to describe his feelings vis-a-vis the occupation's crimes against the Palestinian children. This is for grade 9. And another piece, Jews are demonized not only in the context of the conflict, but also in a religious context as a corrupt nation from its very beginning, and also as enemies of Islam in its early years in Arabia. I mean, the inhabitants of Medina, the Jewish inhabitants of Medina, and Prophet Muhammad and said, the honorable messenger, that's Muhammad, was careful from the beginning of the propagation of the Islamic religion to keep close ties between the Muslims and the Jewish inhabitants of Medina, although he was aware of the Jews' deceitfulness and conspiracies. So they are and the Jews have perpetrated war crimes against our people. This is in the context of the conflict. Jihad and Shahada, martyrdom, are exalted. Jihad in God's cause is for the liberation of the homeland from its contamination by the occupation. And Shahada, martyrdom, let the youth water the homeland soil with their pure blood. Now, there is a problem, because not all of the students are aware of the qualities of a martyr. Therefore, the teacher is required to make them understand that. So he is directed to direct the students to find information in books, in the Quran, or ask the teachers of Islamic education class, and then he brings some verses from the Quran to show that martyrdom is very positive thing, and everything should think about the possibility of becoming a martyr in the future. Also, grade 4, I forgot to give you that, the issue of return of the refugees, not to Israel, but to liberated Palestine, is very much instilled in the youngsters' minds. The student will call out, this is an assignment, the student should call out loudly the statement, "We shall definitely return." We shall definitely return. This is a homework, actually, for the student. Terror is part and parcel of the liberation struggle, and the main figure in this struggle is the Fidai. Fidai is somebody who is ready to sacrifice his own life. So they talk about the Fidai, the definition of Fidai in schools. Fidai, the Palestinian jihad fighter for the liberation of his country from the occupation, who is ready to carry out the most dangerous military actions. Now, the most important, the most famous Fidai is Dalal al-Mughrabi, who led the terrorist attack on a Israeli civilian bus in 1978 on the coastal highway, in which more than 30 persons were killed, including children. Now, repetition is something, or minute detail, or fracturing a subject into minute details is part of the indoctrination. And I read, the student should mention the town where Dalal Mughrabi was born, mention the name of the group commanded by Dalal and the number of its members, mention Dalal's age at her martyrdom, mention the place where she and her group landed, clarify the goal of the operation of hijacking the bus by Dalal and her group, clarify the result of the battle, and so on and so on, so on, many details that for the kids, the children, will get the picture very intensively. This is for grade 5. Dalal is even exalted and become a heroine, national Palestinian heroine, very equal to Yasser Arafat. There is a sentence saying we have many Palestinian heroes, among them Yasser Arafat and Sheikh Izzeddin al-Qassam, who led sort of revolt in the 30s against the British and was killed, and he is the source of inspiration of the Hamas organization. So Yasser Arafat and Izzeddin al-Qassam and Dalal al-Maghrabi. And then the student is asked to give the answer, name 2 Palestinian heroes. And the right answer in the teacher's guide is Yasser Arafat and Dalal al-Maghrabi. So Dalal al-Maghrabi is elevated to rank much higher than that of Izzeddin al-Qassam, probably because of the feud between Fatah and Hamas. I talked about the prison. So this is the method or way the indoctrination is being done actually in all Palestinian schools, including UNRWA schools. And the general picture is very gloomy. I mean, a whole generation of Palestinian youngsters is lost. They are becoming tools in the hand of the system, and they are taught they have no hope rather other than to become a martyr. So I think this is very awful kind of teaching, or rather non-teaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gross. It's an honor for me to now introduce Bassam Eid, a Palestinian activist who will share his perspective on life in and with UNRWA.
Thank you, Rabbi Kuber. I think by following what my colleague Arnon almost reported, it looks like that the UNRWA curriculum it probably will lead for a war one day. Because when you are talking about martyrs, when you talk about an Islamic fighter, that means that looks like that the war is really very close to us. Imagine when a Palestinian boy waking up in the morning, going to the school, and the teacher try to teach him how the Jews killed his grandfather. and how the Jews demolished his neighborhood or his house. That's immediately will lead for a kind of revenge. And we saw many Palestinian students who escaped from the schools, went to their houses, got a knife, and running into the streets inside Israel, looking for innocent Jewish to stab him, in turn to kill him, not to injure him. Now, who is benefiting from the current situation? In my opinion, is only UNRWA and the Palestinian leadership, under the eyes of the international community. So the international community must have to be blamed here on the current situation. Because those who are trying to provide the financial support to UNRWA are very aware about such kind of textbooks. And I think that those countries that they have been mentioned by Rabbi Cooper, like Germany, UK, France, and Japan, must have to be very aware where is the UNRWA curriculum is leading us. Friends, I think and I believe that we the Palestinians need help. But the question is, via whom is such help is going to be provided to the Palestinians? That's a very important issue. Is such kind of a corrupt organization, I didn't see that in the past 7 decades, it tried to help the Palestinians. I didn't see right now that UNRWA is really trying to solve the issue of the Palestinian refugees. And that's reminding me, just in the beginning of this week, when the New Year school opened, the head of UNRWA, Pierre Krimble, attended the opening of one of the schools in Jordan. What he said last Sunday, that UNRWA will never stop its operations until the issue of the Palestinian refugees will be solved. But you already ruling the Palestinian refugee issue in the past 70 years. What you really did to the Palestinians? And the question is, the international community by itself, for how long they are still ready to continue supporting UNRWA and taking care of the Palestinian refugees? That's a big question. Do we need another 70 years or another 100 years? So this is not the way. This is not the way. I think that all of the countries who are supporting UNRWA financially should have to meet and probably to find another instruments how we can provide help to the Palestinians without UNRWA. I think that that's possible, and that's probably will lead for a kind of solution. There is a lot of money here around the world waiting to be spent on the Palestinian refugees. But everybody is hesitating to provide such a huge amounts of money to the Palestinian refugees via UNRWA. I think that we, the Palestinians, almost became so frustrated, so hopeless from any future to be under the mandate of UNRWA. I believe that UNRWA these days are trying to keep the Palestinian refugees as hostages rather than to find a solution for them. This is the feeling of the Palestinians. And I think that if we want to seek a change towards the Palestinian refugees issue, this building is the first building that we should have to start from. From here, we should have to start in turn to bring for a better change and a better life for the Palestinian refugees. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bassam. Now, person who really needs no introduction, David Bedin, who's devoted decades to trying to bridge the gap between Israelis, the Jewish world, and the Palestinian people. David.
Good morning. Originally, I'm an American, grew up in Philadelphia, been in Israel for the last 49 years. In my first week in Israel and until today, I've been working on the issue of UNRWA, the Palestinian refugees. The late Rabbi Eugene Weiner, the founder of the Abraham Fund, came to my high school in Philadelphia in 1968 and said, you know, the Six-Day War has given Israel an opportunity it can use. The Palestinian refugees are now in our hands. What are we going to do about it? Rather than look at them as cheap labor, as people who happen to be here, let's do something to get rid of the concept of them as refugees. 32 years ago, after completing a social work degree, I started an agency which has been working on the issue of solving the issue of the UNRWA problem, the UNRWA issue, to try to say, hey, is there a way we can look at now it's 5 million people who are descendants of Arab refugees, who are told, you know, you're in terrible conditions because we can't do anything about it because you're supposed to go back to where you came from. And 32 years ago, it was a matter-of-fact issue. Now it's almost a military issue, an issue of instruction, what Dr. Gross has found and what Bassam Eid has mentioned, that the concept of training people to be regimented, the idea that they're going back to their homes. In 1987, when I would walk around a refugee camp, they would say, yeah, we're going to go back to our homes, la-di-da. Today is we're going to go back to our homes from 48 and kill the people who live there. And it's very hard to believe that. But let's take a look at the UNRWA. So we asked last week. First of all, you've seen the films that we made are on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, 28 films. The latest film was made last week. The UNRWA youth ambassador, Mohammed Asaf, who has been the youth ambassador for the last 6 years, he made a presentation to launch the school year. And the message he made on behalf of UNRWA speaks for itself.
المقاومة مشروعة 100%، سواء كانت سلمية سواء كانت عسكرية.
Here is the young man whom UNRWA appointed to be their ambassador of goodwill only 6 years ago.
الأغنية كالبندقية، الأغنية الوطنية لها دور في تحفيز الشعوب دائما الثائرة.
Let's introduce Mohammed Asaf, the rising star in the Arab world after he won the Arab Idol popularity contest.
أتحدث اليوم بصفتي سفير الأونروا الإقليمي للشباب، وهو دور أفخر بالقيام به وأشعر بمسؤولية عظيمة حياله.
Mohammed grew up in Gaza, in a refugee camp run by UNRWA, United Nations Relief and Works Agency.
درست وتعلمت في مدارس الأونروا، ووالدتي اليوم تعمل معلمة في الأونروا.
On Friday night, August 23rd, Mohammed Asaf filled the amphitheater in Rabi, just north of Ramallah, and whipped up the crowd with songs of violence, which UNRWA chose not to notice. Only hours earlier, not far away, a 17-year-old Jewish girl, Nira Schnerb, was killed by a firebomb thrown by a Palestinian Arab, which also maimed her father and her brother. Yet the UNRWA ambassador of goodwill decided to go on with the show, as if nothing had happened.
رغم هالظروف نشوف هذا العدد، هذا مفخرة. أهلا وسهلا فيكم ونورتونا وشرفتونا يا حبايب.
نقول للعالم هنا باقون، هنا صامدون، في فلسطين أرضنا. للقدس التحية، لعاصمتنا الأبدية.
علي الكوفي وعلم، يخلي البارود يهلم.
الأغاني الوطنية العساف اللي بغنيها فخر لنا وفخر لفلسطين. الأغاني الوطنية هي بتكون دافع لكل شخص إنه كمان هي جانب من جوانب المقاومة.
What Muhammad Asif did not forget was to preach the new generation with the values that he had learned from UNRWA classroom to nurture the dream of the right of return by force of arms. Muhammad Asaf makes his presence known on the stage, but also in the schools in which UNRWA operates.
لما أنا بسمع أغاني محمد عساف ببقى متمسك بالوطن والفلسطين وهيك.
بتخليك تصير تحب في الوطن أكثر، بتصير بدك تسوي إشي للوطن، بتصير مثلا تقاتل العدوين الآخرين.
بشرفنا وبنورنا كلياتنا إمنا ام ناصر حميد اللي شرفتنا على الحفل اليوم. تحية إلها ولأبنائها الأسرى وإلى كل الأسرى.
Latif Hamad greets Muhammad Asaf on the podium. Her claim to fame is that she is the mother of 6 murderers, one of whom was killed, while the rest of whom are serving in the imprisonment for complicity in the act of murder of 20 people.
غزة بتطلع رجال. أهل غزة لما ينضرب صاروخ بيجوا، تانيين ينضرب عليهم صاروخ بشردوا، بخافوا. احنا ما تعودناش على الخوف، احنا مع الكرامة، يا بعيش بكرامة يا بموت بكرامة. الأغنية أيضا مقاومة، والكلمة مقاومة، والفن مقاومة. فتنت روحي يا شهيد، علمتها معنى الخلود، شوقتها إلى الرحيل، علمتها معنى الصمود.
Thank you, David. Because of timing, if there are any questions, please raise your hand and identify yourself, and there's a mic. We'll take them one at a time.
Thank you for the briefing. I'm Evelyn Leopold. I have 3 questions. In Dr. Gross's analysis of the books and the teachers, was that part of the 3% that Mr. Rabbi Cooper said should be eliminated? Secondly, they're outside of the West Bank and Gaza. There really are Palestinian refugees in Jordan and in other countries. What happens to them? And my main question is, you seem to be moving toward the U.S. plan, whatever that may be. I've written about parts that have leaked out to raise the living standards of the Palestinians, and then everything would go away and they wouldn't talk about the golden oldie of having a separate state. Could you comment on all three? Thank you.
Let me start with the last one because I'm an old man. I already forgot the first question, which I know is for Dr. Gross. I had the opportunity to attend the Bahrain Economic Conference. I'm not an economist. I've never balanced a checkbook. But I think there was something very profound that took place there, which was a lot of powerful institutions from around the world. The IMF, the World Bank, AT&T, even FIFA, all gathered for 2 days there with specific plans about how to help the Palestinian lifestyle go to a new level. We know that the Palestinian Authority put on a boycott. There was only one person from Hebron who attended. I don't think it's a sin for the international community, or for that either led by with the United States and others, to make every effort to improve the lives of Palestinians. I think it's also clear that the economic issue is only part of a much bigger puzzle. And I have no idea what's in the deal of the century. I think that based on history, we're all going to collectively burn that bridge when we get to it. But I think the fact that you have this embedded, actually official policy of the PA of non-involvement, no public interaction with Israelis at all. Even when you have humanitarian issues, I'm involved with an effort on the West Bank to have a medical facility built between Hebron and Bethlehem. I've met with some Palestinians who are not members of the PA but are close to them, and every single one of them has basically said, well, this is a great project, but of course, any involvement of Israel, the Israelis, would have to be kept secret. Now, I'm an old man, and I'm kind of past that. I think what we really need is a new era of engagement, and whether it's led from the EU or from the White House is really, at this point, not the main question, but you can see when you match the kind of education that kids get where you don't even see the word Israel on a map, in which it's never uttered in a classroom. You have this kind of mass psychology, you can call it brainwashing if you wish, certainly indoctrination, that the people living next to them have no legitimacy. There's no such thing really as the state of Israel. And Jews are very, very bad people. That's something that needs to be broken. I watched a very talented singer just now. Everything that he sang and said, and others said as well, they have the right to say those things, but the international community has the right not to be given the bill to pay for that kind of education or that kind of evening. That, I think, right now is why the Wiesenthal Center will be focusing its attention on donor nations, because the people who are writing the checks, they do not include President Trump, have tremendous leverage to change the reality on the ground. On the issue of the 3%.
Yeah, well, if the conflict is done in Palestinian school books in 3%, then that's 3%, because everything that is said about the conflict is negative, is that Israel has no legitimacy to exist, the Jews' presence is illegitimate, and they should leave in one way or another, and Israel itself should be de-established, namely the whole of Palestine should be liberated by force, and terror is part of it, and this is a conflict actually. So those 3% are the conflict. If the conflict is done in 3%, that's it. Maybe they have some 97% about love of the fathers, love of the family, love of neighbors, and so on, but that doesn't count regarding the conflict.
Let me add one more point. About 6 weeks ago, at their request, I met with the Washington and New York representatives of UNRWA here in New York City. And one of the points that was raised, I think with great pride, was the fact that in the curriculum, there is a whole section on conflict, peaceful conflict resolution. and which I think is a great thing. I'd like to see it in maybe some of the schools in LA. But the problem with the curriculum is the 3%, meaning you teach young people how to avoid violence in resolving conflict with the people around them, everyone except Jews. When I asked them, well, what about conflict resolution with the Jewish people? There was no answer. It was a shrug of the shoulders, and in other parts of the conversation saying that, you know, UNRWA has to deal with reality on the ground. They don't have as much leverage and flexibility as they would like. And I would imagine that there's some truth to that. But when you take a closer look at what's going on, it's not just a matter of being a bystander. UNRWA is a scandal-ridden institution. You heard from Bassam Eid. If you heard nothing else, you heard the frustration in his voice about where to go further. And insofar as President Trump's deal of the century, let's all agree that economics is not the core, but it was so clear when you heard the CEO of AT&T, Stevenson, say, oh, you want to go to 4 or 5G, and it's no big deal, take whatever the sum they threw out. I thought it was a lot of money. But he said it will take a very short period of time, except there is the issue, the security issue. So if the Palestinians and Israelis can resolve that piece, another guy, Schwartzman, who I think handles $20 billion of investments around the world, he said he looked at the economy and he said, Gaza aside, so the West Bank is not too bad. It needs about 20 or 30 billion dollars of investment. I think that's a lot of money. He didn't, but that can be done. He said there's only one issue. Investors want to know if there's the rule of law, if there's going to be security. So I think that the main message that came out of Bahrain is something that the Palestinian Authority doesn't want to hear. Meaning the international community is there to help. It's ready to move in and help float the boat, if you will, but they want transparency and they want accountability, something that the Palestinian Authority simply will not do.
I would like to add regarding the 3%. This is a textbook for grade 3, semester 2. We have 15 lessons here. 3 of them are about the conflict. So how much is it? 3 out of 15 in person. I'm not good at mathematics. So 20%. Haifa and the Seagull is 1. And then in the port of Gaza, this is the second one. And the third one is a visit to the city of grapes, which is Hebron. This is the third, which are totally negative. And all the others are about the day of the trees, the shepherds and the wolf. I would like to be our traditions, the raven and the fox, and things like that. So 3% are the conflict, actually.
Ben Ivansky, Fox News. Question to Mr. Eid. What is the Palestinian perception of UNRWA? And second question to the panel, you say it's time for UNRWA to go. What do you recommend as the replacement? And I understand the GA is taking it up this next session. Do you believe there's any chance that countries will go against the present mandate? Because I don't see that personally, in looking at the situation, doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, as I mentioned, you know, that we, the Palestinians, became so let's say, frustrated and so hopeless from any kind of solution to the issue of the Palestinian refugees via UNRWA. As I mentioned, UNRWA is ruling the Palestinians almost for 70 years. What has been done to the Palestinian refugees? In my opinion, just nothing. While UNRWA today is seeking fund for 80,000 Palestinian refugees in the Al Yarmouk refugee camp in Syria, while everybody knows that in Al Yarmouk refugee camp right now, only 5,000 Palestinians are living. Only 5. So that's giving you the impression what is UNRWA is really looking for. It looks like, sometimes people abroad coming to me and saying, listen, why UNRWA is not really solving the issue of the Palestinian refugees? I said, for one simple reason. If UNRWA will solve the issue of the Palestinian refugees, then the 30,000 employees of UNRWA will become jobless and refugees. So I think that it is a factory of money. And I'm looking to the all Israeli-Palestinian conflict these days as a kind of a commercial conflict rather than it is a political one. Everybody is fighting for money, but no one is fighting for a solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is exactly the impression of the Palestinians towards UNRWA these days.
Let me address the other issue you raised. I'm not very good in Yiddish, but there is a Yiddish term that says roughly, those who have the mea, meaning the money, have the dea, meaning they're the ones who persevere. I don't believe that we're going to see anyway an immediate change. You can't do this overnight, and you don't want to dislocate people who definitely need to get services. It is going to be a process, but you cannot overestimate the impact that if the 4 top donor nations agreed with Switzerland and some of the others that have begun to ask questions because of the financial scandal, there's got to be a better way to do this. This is not a message to a struggling king of Jordan who's already taken in so many refugees from the Syrian conflict that you're going to have to fend for yourself. The monies are there. The question is how it's deployed. It's probably beyond my pay grade. The answer will not come from the General Assembly because the votes are from countries, some of whom give zero, some of them give nothing, but if they got paid by the word, would be a top donor nation. But the real decisions should be made by the countries who've put their money where their mouths are. And so a restructuring of how that kind of aid is deployed is doable. It will have to, I think, be presented by those nations back to the United Nations and say, okay, this is how we're going to do it. If we wait for the General Assembly, I think it's safe to say that our grandchildren will have grandchildren.
Let me make it easy with a very quick 5 points that can be adopted by any agency that makes sense. I'll have it on the board here. If UNRWA were to cancel its curriculum, number 2, cease military training, which we have filmed in the schools. 3, insist that UNRWA dismiss any employee who's a terrorist. 4, introduce the standards of UNHCR to UNRWA. In other words, it can't be replaced by UNRWA. UNRWA can't be replaced by UNHCR, but they can use their standards. And last but not least, how about an audit of donor funds? And these are issues which you don't have to, in a sense, be an Israel lobbyist to appreciate. They're basic issues of accountability and transparency. And that's it. What we have here, these are opposed by the regime of the Palestinian Authority, not by the people. There's no one who wants medical services who would disagree with this. However, the regime of the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, rejects this. Well, the donor nations have their own agenda, and we can work with them.
Okay, we have only about 3 more minutes. We'll take the last question.
Yes, Joseph Klein of Canada Free Press. You mentioned one of the points of reform would be to cease the employment by UNRWA of any terrorists. Do any of you have data, current data, particularly in Gaza, of Hamas-affiliated teachers in UNRWA schools, either in terms of numbers or percentages of the universe of teachers in UNRWA schools who there's credible evidence of affiliation with Hamas? Thank you.
For the last 20 years, our agency has retained the services of both Arab and Israeli journalists to cover the elections which take place every few years to run the School Teachers Union and the Workers Union of Gaza, of UNRWA in Gaza. What's very important to understand is that what we have on our site, if I can get onto it quickly, I can't get onto it quickly, but is the slates that have been endorsed by UNRWA, by Hamas, the PFLP, have won overwhelmingly since 1999 for 20 years. And they are controlling the purse strings. And all monies that are allocated to UNRWA in Gaza go through this framework. 30 years ago, we exposed the scandal that the PLO was controlling the purse strings. It's the same story. So if you have the people controlling the purse strings, that's the way it is. It's at a 90% level of the Hamas-endorsed candidates winning the elections.
Let me close the press conference by actually quoting what I asked the same question of the two UNRWA representatives. And their answer to me was that if you can show from a published list that a person is a member of a terrorist organization, that person will be removed. So just for full disclosure, I asked the question, that was the answer that I got. I think that the response from Mr. Bedin sort of explains what the reality is on the ground. Thank you very much for your interest. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent.